إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون. أما بعد, indeed all praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We praise Him, we thank Him, we seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evils of ourselves. We seek help, forgiveness, we devote our attention, time, devotion, all to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Divine, the Almighty. And I remind you, dear brothers and dear sisters, to fear Allah the way He should be feared, and do not die except in the state of al-Islam. As for what is to proceed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, in a group of verses which are extremely powerful, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts these verses off in a very, very powerful manner as well. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "I'lamu." Know. Now one may ask himself that whenever I'm reading the Quran, I am reading it to know something. In fact, whenever I'm reading anything, any worldly book or religious book, any material at all, I'm reading it to know something. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in certain places in the Quran, He emphasizes the fact that He wants you to remember this right here. Know this. So this is how important it is. Even though you, as a human being, don't read anything, except that you're trying to find information, except that you're trying to come to an understanding, over here, this is even more so important. Know this really well. Indeed, of a surety, the worldly life. Al-hayat al-dunya. The life that is a lowly life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whenever He talks about al-hayat al-dunya, the worldly life, He calls it one of two things. Most of the time, just this one over here. Allah either calls it al-ula in certain places in the Quran, or He calls it al-dunya. Over here He's calling it al-dunya. And that's the norm within the Quran. That it's a lowly life. Al-dunya means something that's low. So Allah wants you to know the reality of this lowly life. أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا. And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to recognize that reality, first He reminds you of the fact that this is not just like all of the other passages, read and move on, even though the other passages were also commanded to ponder. But this is even more so exaggerated and important. Recognize, أَنَّمَا, indeed of a surety. But this particular word, أَنَّمَا, it's a little bit unique in that it emphasizes all that is to come. Everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to say, Allah is emphasizing it, but at the exclusion of any other possibilities. Allah is going to give you a few possibilities about what life is. There's no other possibilities. You think about it and you ponder it. Most of the people, their lives are within these possibilities. For some few people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen, and they themselves have made the effort, then their course of life starts to become slightly different. What are these possibilities? Allah says, أَنَّمَا الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيَا لَعِبٌ. The first and foremost, لَعِبٌ. It's just playing around. It's child play. It's childish, foolish things that we do. And you know what? When we look at these possibilities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us over here, we're actually going to recognize the stages of life that we all go through. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to strike a brilliant, and everything in the Quran is brilliant, a brilliant parable to hit it right home. Right. Now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, indeed, the worldly life, the lowly life, it's la'ib. When a person is born, what happens? For those of you that have little siblings, or for those of you that actually have children as well, you all know when you see a child, they do a couple of things, right? That's all they do. Number one, They're going to either use the bathroom, they're going to drink some milk, or they're going to play around and do nothing else, right? So this is the first phase of life. Allah calls it la'ib. A child is just going to be playing around, doing nothing, neither something that's going to benefit his soul, nor something that's going to fulfill his desires. He doesn't have animalistic desires yet. He hasn't gotten to that age. But as you grow slightly older, the parents start to say something. They say, we need to keep our children busy. They're breaking things in the house. They're causing a ruckus. They can't let us have a conversation peacefully. We need to have them busy with something. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the second phase of life, لَعِبٌ وَلَهُ. Then comes that phase, which is an occupational phase. But occupation and useless things still. لَهُ. Just useless matters, being occupied in them. You give a child something, tell them to run from here to there and there to here, they'll do it for 3 hours. And they'll continue to do it and they'll have fun in it. Even though there's nothing useful about it, except the fact that their body is benefiting. But the point is that if you give them even something that doesn't benefit their bodies, just tell them to repeat one word 3,000 times. They'll do it 15,000 for you. Right? Why? Because this is the phase of life, lahu, doing useless things. Things that have no benefit, no meaning within them, neither for the religion, neither for the soul, nor for the body. But sometimes what happens is, people get stuck in that phase of life. People get stuck in that phase of life, right? Video games. There are video games out there. Yes, there are. Some that may be a little bit educational, I admit. But there's going to be other ones that are not educational at all. But a person that is 35, a person that's 40 years old, and believe you me, I met a person in the plane, he's 50 years old. 50 years old. And I asked him what he does. He's got a business. And then he opened his iPad and started playing Angry Birds. Right? That was useless. It doesn't help him at all. But people get stuck in this phase. And that's why we say these things are childish. As the poet says, that it is something ugly. It is something extremely ugly for a grown man to act like a child. But what's even more worse, and what's even more ugly, is when an elderly individual comes and starts to act like that grown man. What do I mean by that? There's things that are considered socially acceptable and socially normal for a 30-year-old man to do. And then there's things that are considered, or a 25-year-old man to do. But then there's things that are considered socially normal for a person that's a little bit older, 50 and 60. There's a different norm for how this person is supposed to carry himself. But sometimes what happens to us is we get stuck in those phases. Which phase are you going to be in? We're not going to go and tell the little child that's playing around and doing things that have no benefit within them that, you know what, you should stop doing this. He's not going to understand what you're telling him. But are we doing childish things? Are we still stuck in the childhood phase? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues and He gets to the next phase. He says, وَزِينَةٌ. And then comes after that, beautification. After that comes beautification. If you go to a high school or early university, right? If you go to a high school or early university, you'll see people beautified right to their nose. Every single person, for girls, they'll have their nail polish, the rings, everything will be done. For brothers and guys, they'll have their way of doing things as well. Everything will be fully beautified because now they've passed adolescence, they're now reaching the adulthood or early adulthood. And around that time is the time where a person likes to beautify himself. Give it a couple of years. The same guy that's got his shoes shining, when he gets to his 30s, he won't worry about that anymore. Give it a couple of years, the same guy that's got his hair done every single day, when he gets to his 25, 30, again, he won't be worried about that anymore. This is the norm of life. This is the norm of life. And just like that is the norm of something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will speak about. After that comes وَتَفَاخُرٌ. Then comes this fakhar. وَزِينَةٌ. وَتَفَاخُرٌ. Then comes the phase where people start to boast. Imagine yourself in your mind right now, a man that's 35, that's 37, that's gotten to his 40s now. The type of conversation that people have around that age, 40, 45 even. A lot of times the conversations go something like this. When they're sitting in a gathering, it will be nothing but boasting. When I was 15 years of age, I almost won the national badminton cup for my high school. When I was 15 years of age, I came first in my class. The other guy was saying, you know what? You came first in your class, I was first in the whole district. Tafakhur. It's a mutual way of boasting. Everybody's going to be boasting and trying to outboast one another. Because now they really feel, even though they can, but they feel internally that they can't do anything anymore to reach somewhere. But the person that's connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he recognizes that all of these phases of life, that's one thing. But then there is the connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is everlasting. You look at this particular verse, and you look at the fact that a child is growing when he's simply a child. There's one thing. When he grows a little bit older, there's another thing. When he grows even more older, there's a third thing. When he grows even further, then there's a fourth thing. And after that, there's a fifth. What's the fifth? Takathu. 60-year-old people, 70-year-old people, what are they doing? Counting money. If the person has lived his life the way he wanted to throughout his life, right now, even if he's a millionaire, he wants some more money. You tell a teenager, do you want $1 million? He'll be happy with $1 million. You tell a 60-year-old man, you want $1 million? And he's already a millionaire, so no, I want 3. I want 4. I want 5 because my counterpart down the street's got 4. I have to have the 5. Takathur. It will be in awlad, it will be in children. A teenager does not recognize the fitna of children. We don't recognize it when we're really young. We don't understand that. You don't understand the fitna, the trial, the tribulation of having children and wanting more and more and more because you're not in that phase. When you get to that phase, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, then what do you want? But takathur. You want more and more and more of money and of children. And that's exactly what happens in our lives. But on the side of all of that is another thing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the example of all of this is كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ. The example of all of what I've said is like the example of a rain. كَمَثَلِ غَيْثٍ. The example of a rain. أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. Kuffar, meaning the farmers, they're so shocked. Kuffar, by the way, amongst the meanings is a farmer. Because kafara means to cover. A farmer, what does he do? He takes the seeds and he covers them up in dirt. So that's why kuffar or farmers are also called kuffar. That's amongst the meanings. And this is how Ibn Mas'ud explained this verse. And in fact, some people even say that the word cover in Arabic, in English, actually comes from the word kafa. You can even hear it. Kafa, cover, kafa, cover. Because kafara means to cover something up. So, al-kuffar over here, or the kuffar over here, are in reference to the farmers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, it's like the rain. أَعْجَبَ الْكُفَّارَ نَبَاتُهُ. The farmers are awestruck at the type of vegetation that will come out of it because of this. Okay? Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ يَهِيجْ. Then this vegetation is going to grow big, and after it becomes big, it will become strong and stiff. It will start to become stiff. Haja, for those of you that know Arabic, haja, sometimes you say that about people, sometimes you say that about an animal, sometimes you say that about a desire. It's when it starts to become tyrannical. You say haja. Why? Because when you start to become tyrannical, or when the animal starts to become tyrannical, what happens? There's a noise that comes from it. Whether you like it or not, you'll start breathing hard. Whether the animal likes it or not, it'll start also breathing hard. To sort of get the message across that I'm not as content as I seem right now. I, deep down inside, am very troubled at the moment. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when the trees become to this level of hayajan, meaning when the trees become so large, big, and now they're about to fall. The leaves are about to fall. When they're getting close to that, the leaves become stiff. And when the wind flows through those leaves, you hear it. You hear the hayajan. Just as you would do in human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the example of all of that is rain falling, and that rain falling makes it seem like, this tree is going to look really nice, and people around, the farmers, they're saying, this tree is going to look beautiful when the nabat comes out, when the vegetation comes out, it grows, it becomes thick and powerful. After it does all of that, what happens now? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ثُمَّ تَرَاهُ مُصْفَرًا. Then you will see, then you will see this vegetation all yellow. You see the leaves become all yellow. And what happens to human beings? They grow old, they look beautiful, you think they're going to do a lot of things. As they grow old, their skin becomes all pale, it starts to become pigmented, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving you that example. You will look at it and you will think it's useless now. Similarly, an old man, when people look at an old man in society, they start to feel bad for him. They feel sorry for him. Someone stand, even though the man can walk, even though he can do everything for his life, a strong one especially. But people in the society, they start to feel bad. They start to think, well, this guy's gone pale, he's going to die soon. Right? May Allah protect and preserve all of you. But that's how people think. That's why Allah says, He doesn't say it becomes musfar, it becomes yellow. He says when you look at it, it will seem as if it's yellow. When you look at that old man, it seems as if he's weak. But he inside, he's probably got a higher will than a lot of us. Then you see it pale. Then it comes to an end. That is the example of life. But that example of life is the example of life for a person that is not leading it properly. I say this because this is the example of life for a person whose actions have not become such that they outlive time. Actions that outlive time are those actions that are done for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who Himself lives on as time proceeds. Who Himself will outlive time. So if you want to live on as everything else is passing away, just like these trees, then you have to look into your actions. Are you doing them for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or are you doing them for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. الحمد لله حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيده وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى اله وصحبه اجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا كريم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues and He says, وفي الآخرة عذاب شديد ومغفرة من الله ورضوان وما الحياة الدنيا إلا متاع. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is in terms of the dunya. This is in terms of the dunya. And remember, the example is the example of a person who's not doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because we said, for those that do it for Allah, their deeds will outlive time. 100 years will go by, 200 years will go by, 300, the earth and the planets and the universe will come to an end. But the deeds will not come to an end, because they will be written in scrolls by the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ you have two choices. One is the choice of the parable that I've given you, and two is the choice that's understood, that doesn't fall within that parable. وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ, and within the hereafter, the person will have one of two things. عَذَابٌ شَدِيد, either a very, very severe torment. A very, very severe torment. We all know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's rahmah, His mercy outweighs Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's wrath. Inna rahmati sabaqat ghadabi. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala finished the creation, He wrote in a kitab, فَهُوَ عِنْدَهُ فَوْقَ الْعَرْشِ إِنَّ رَحْمَتِي سَبَقَتْ غَضَبِي. That my rahmah has outdone my ghadab, my wrath. If we know that, why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts an adjective for the adab, for the fire? وَفِي الْآخِرَةِ عَذَابٌ شَدِيد. In the hereafter, we'll find a severe torment. For the torment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions how severe it is. When it comes to the maghfirah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَغْفِرَةٌ مِنَ اللَّهِ. And the other choice is either you have the severe torment, and the other choice is you have maghfirah, forgiveness, and ridwan, and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for the case of the fire, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the severity of this fire. Why? For a couple of reasons. Number one, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had narrated this parable to us primarily because He wanted us to be reminded of the path that leads down to hellfire. Not caring about anything, only looking into your animalistic desires. So He brings the fire first and foremost. Number two, He wants us to stop from this. And then He gives us two rewards, and not one. Even though this has an adjective, let me put it this way. If I was to say that you're going over there and that man is pretty dangerous, but I'm going to send 2 security guards with you. Do you feel safe now? You feel safe because no matter how dangerous that man is, he's just one person. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you 2 securities. Maghfirah, min Allah, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also on top of that, ridwan. Pleasure. We always say, radiyallahu anhu wa radu an. Sahaba, Allah is pleased with them, they are pleased with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You want ridwan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then do what He's going to tell you next in this particular commandment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The ulama, they said the whole surah Al-Hadid, this is فَذَّكُمْ مَسُوقٌ مَسَاقَ التَّقِيمِ. This is the conclusion of the surah. This is the entire conclusion of the surah. The climax, the high point. سَابِقُوا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off with one word. سَابِقُوا. Start doing musabaqah. Start racing. Start outdoing one another. We try to outdo one another in things of good, but we don't have the right intention at times. You have this institute doing a course, you have another one doing a course, they'll try to bring the same course. Why? Because they're trying to outdo one another. And then when asked, Allah says, sabiqu, brother. Allah says, sabiqu. It's what Allah told us to do. So we're doing musabaqah. We are racing for the sake of Allah to outdo one another. But Allah says, no. Sabiqu ila what? Ila maghfirah. Then race to the maghfirah, because He gave you 2 choices. He either gave you maghfirah wa ridwan, He gave you His forgiveness along with His pleasure, or He told you about adab shadeed. So then make your choice and do musabaqah. And that's what I'm going to talk about over here. And that's what I'm going to stop at over here. Do musabaqah. You've got lots of good things to do in this world. Lots of good. People are going to continue. People are going to continue. If one effort stops, there's going to be somebody else that will open up another one. Nobody is waiting for you. Nobody is waiting for you. There's thousands of people out there. You're not able to memorize the Quran to lead people in Taraweeh. Somebody else will do it. You're not able to learn the religion properly to be able to come over here on this member and give the khutbah. Somebody else will do it. But what you've been asked to do is do musabaqah, race, but make your race for the sake of Allah, for the forgiveness of Allah, and not for any other reason. Sabiqu ila maghfirah. Race for the maghfirah from your Lord, min rabbikum. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says 2 things, remember? Either you have adab shadeed, either you have a very, very severe torment, or you have the maghfirah and the ridwan. Now, ridwan is a word which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only uses for Allah in the Quran. Allah uses maghfirah. It's there for Allah and other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Definitely Allah that is wajib to ibtigha'a Allah. Allah uses maghfirah for, which means pleasure as well, for Allah and other than Allah. Ridwan is a special type of It's a special type of pleasure. It's a pleasure that human beings attain from the Almighty. You're not even going to be able to be matched up in terms of this word if you were to do musabaqah. Nobody is going to be able to reward you with this type of pleasure because it's a pleasure directly directed from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you were to do something and there's some prize that has been made for a certain action, let's say somebody says, well, whoever is able to write 1,000 lines of poetry about the messenger, I'll give them a reward, 100,000. Nobody has that much cash except one person in the country, and that's the person that's going to reward you. It's only one reward, one type of reward. One person that can reward. If 15 people bring the 1,000 100,000 lines of poetry. At the same moment, the person will give them all 100,000, but it will be just from that individual. It'll be a special, unique prize. You have special, unique access to a type of pleasure you're not going to find anywhere else. And by the way, when we give people after we're pleased, it's different than when we give people when we're not pleased. You go to a cashier, they don't like you, they'll do their job because they're afraid of losing their job. But if they like you, they're going to treat you very nicely. They're going to give you a nice big smile. They might give you some tokens. They might give you some bonus. They might give you a lot of things that you didn't think about. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you, that is a special pleasure. You're going to get things from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you weren't even able to imagine. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the tawfiq to practice, to convey. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار وادخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار وأقم الصلاة إن الصلاة تنهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر ولذكر الله أكبر والله يعلم ما تصنعون.